Good morning, everyone. A very special welcome on behalf of SALGA and the Wits School of Governance. We're very excited about today's program and to have all of you and your audience. So thank you so much for joining us. The session today will look at the impact of COVID-19 on the municipal economy. And we have quite a full lineup of speakers today. So just a few house rules. Please use the Q&A function for all your questions and comments. The session is being recorded and will be shared with anybody who needs the link. We're also live streaming it on Facebook. And I would like you to please also urge you to use the Q&A function for all questions and comments. And what will happen is our moderator, Dr. Nomfundo Ngwenya, will go through them at the end of each presentation. So over to you, Dr. Ngwenya.
Thank you, Kamantha. Good morning, colleagues, and welcome to everybody who's joining us in this session. And a special welcome to our speakers, and thank you for availing yourselves. As Kamantha has indicated, I'll be moderating the session. And without further ado, since we do have a very tight program, I'd like to move straight on to Councillor Tunzihawu, who will give us the opening and welcome. Councillor Tunzihawu, please lead us. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kamantha and Dr. Ngwenya, for the opportunity. This program is taking place after a long 6-month lockdown period, which really has affected the communities in different ways. It has impacted negatively on how we live. The members of the public have lost their relatives and loved ones during this period. We also, on a month of the heritage, and have heard the president pronouncing that from sometime next week we are moving to level 1, but there's a new way of living which we are going to be required to comply to, even though we are on level 1, because the economy has been negatively affected. We can't remain in the levels where the economy is not unlocked. To those families who have lost their loved ones during this period, we pass our sincere condolences to them, and we wish all the other community members well during this period. And I know that COVID-19 is not yet over. Hence, there are requirements that even though we are moving to level 1, we must comply to some of the new norms of living, just to make sure that we contribute to the reduction of more infections. I was even suspicious that I might be affected the way I'm sneezing, but it trees that surrounds my environment. We need to be very careful and not to be complacent, so that we positively contribute to this fight against the COVID, which did not really need a scientific knowledge to realize its impact. But surely there's a high commitment from government to make sure that we comply with all the regulations, but at the same time, life must continue. I also appreciate the platform that has been created just to zoom in on how the economy at our local municipalities has been affected by the situation which we are living under. We also appreciate the availability of the School of Governance with its delegation to make sure that we have this platform and participate. We have a number of MMCs who are going to be also partaking, including the officials from different municipalities. We are hoping that out of the discussions, we will be able to make proper recommendations on how best can we improve on the affected economy. With those few words, I warmly welcome you, but please make sure that as you participate, you also comply with the rules on how the online meetings are conducted. But there's no doubt that all of us now have been able to effectively utilize these platforms with a reduction on the challenges that we previously experienced. We are in a state where I think we are able to champion, and this is a new norm where we are not able to meet. It's not automatic that because the numbers and the gatherings are allowed that we must go to those gatherings. We can still have these platforms utilized to the best of the benefit of us in making sure that there's life that is continuing. Let me, without spending a lot of time, say you are warmly welcome. The expectation is maximum participation from different angles and different experiences, and we are hoping that it will be a fruitful deliberation, and it is going to surely benefit local government in different ways. With those few words, colleagues, members and delegates from West School of Government, our SALGA officials from both national and provincial office, MMCs, officials, and any other participants, you are warmly welcome in this platform, and thank you very much for the time given to me to say a word of welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor, for the warm words of welcome. I'm going to move straight on to Mr. Nkahle, who is the portfolio head for the built environment at the South African Local Government Association. And he's also acting as the Provincial Director of Operations for SALGA in Gauteng. Mr. Nkahle, welcome, and please do deliver the background just to tell us why we are here today, the purpose and objective of the webinar. Thank you. Mr. Nkahle, I think you are on mute, so you might be talking without us hearing you.
Okay. Apologies for that. Am I audible now?
Yes, you are. Please go ahead. Thanks.
Okay. I had started talking. Unfortunately, it turns out I was talking to myself. I do apologize. Is my presentation visible on the screen?
Yes, it is.
Okay. No, indeed, where I was at, I was thanking and appreciating yourself as a program director, and thank you for the opportunity to share a few reflections and objectives. I would like to thank also Councillor Tunzi, who is a member of the SALGA Provincial Executive Committee, and within that context, had been the chairperson of the working group responsible for economic growth and investment. Thank you very much for your guidance, Tunzi. And to all other colleagues who are jointly organizers as well as mine is to give a very brief reflection on what we anticipate coming out of today. Firstly, it is a session that is being organized out of Gauteng, as is reflected there, but we are aware that we have participants from other provinces. I noted confirmations from as far afield as the Western Cape, Free State, possibly other provinces as well. We do indeed welcome. While we do note that Gauteng is the economic hub of the country and the continent, we are fully aware of the integral role that the province plays in the provincial, in the economy of the country as a whole. So we do welcome all the colleagues that are joining us here today. Having said that, perhaps just to highlight our entry point as SALGA coming into this conversation, we come into it within the context of a mandate that we've been given coming out of the Constitution of the Republic, which is to transform local government to enable it to fulfill its developmental mandate. For those who are not aware, local government is a developmental and democratic local government. It's turning 20 years this year. On the 5th of December, we had our first democratic elections in the municipal space. And others would argue, is the transformation project still on? It is well indeed very much on. The number of hurdles that we have overcome over that time means that it is now more critical than ever to be quite deliberate about transforming our spaces, transforming our economy generally, and transforming our local economies in particular. How we do that is we collaborate with a number of different partners based on 6 key mandates that we've been given. Firstly is to advocate for policy and regulatory environments that enable various things to be delivered in the municipal space. With that, we collaborate with various arms of state at national and provincial level. We are glad to be collaborating with the Gauteng government in this particular context. We also have the employer body. As the employer role, I'm not going to talk much about that. It's about our responsibility to facilitate conditions of service of municipal workers. The third is building capacity. Again, we partner with various academic institutions as well as other training agencies. We're glad to be collaborating with Wits University today. We provide support and advice on specified areas, strategic profiling of local government as a key cog in the growth and development of our country and of our municipal spaces. Lastly, SALGA sees itself as a knowledge and information sharing agency, which serves as the main hub of local government knowledge and intelligence. It is within that context also that we welcome the collaboration with Wits University in particular. In our transformation projects, we have highlighted 3 broad sets of issues that we believe will take us closer to the promised land. We've divided them into 3 broad outcome goals. The first, of course, being a sustainable and inclusive economic growth, and inclusivity of that growth being a particular case in point. We have nuanced it even further to link it with how we manage space, and in particular, the transformation of space to make our cities and towns a lot more efficient. When our cities and towns are a lot more efficient, it makes business sense for those that are operating in that environment as well. And that is a key case in point in today's conversations. The other 2 also have peripheral reference, but are quite important, and those are governance issues, municipal capabilities, finance and the financial and fiscal sustainability of our municipalities. Now, the growth of the economy has multiple role players in it. Our issue is highlighting the role of local government within that. We see ourselves being key in facilitating a conducive environment for businesses to invest and by extension to operate. Likewise, in the same token, we see ourselves as playing a key role to facilitate trade and related matters, again, through an enabling environment, and that trade can happen both domestically and with also international partners. The determinants of those enabling environments are many and varied. I'm not going to try and elaborate on them. I think it's the subject of conversations today: security, ease of doing business, red tape reduction, governance, etc. The whole value chain, including other social amenities such as health facilities, education, etc., skills development. I think there are other people in the conversation today that can speak much better about that than I do. Likewise, we have also done a bit of an assessment of the strengths that we have and the inherent weaknesses and the threats that are confronting us, and some of the opportunities that we have lying ahead. COVID-19 has impacted on all these 4 areas. I'm hoping that the conversations will help us to strengthen the strengths that we have, to manage out the inherent weaknesses that we have in our value chain, particularly within our own institutional environments, overcome some of the threats. We've been relegated to junk status just before the advent of COVID. There's even more difficulties now that that we are in that space and that COVID is upon us. But we must never waste the perfect crisis. A perfect crisis, much as it has all sorts of difficulties, also presents lots of opportunities for entrepreneurs and the whole economic value chain. The last one where I'm ending, Chair, Program Director, is I am anticipating that this dialogue today will serve as a platform for ourselves, for municipalities, for stakeholders to deliberate on the potential that lies ahead beyond the pandemic. So how do we acknowledge all those challenges that we have, but capitalize on the opportunities that are indicated? While we have a crisis, we have perfect circumstances in certain instances to be able to kickstart. It will be difficult, but I guess if we put our heads together, we can be able to navigate that. As we do that, and a particular case in point as we have the conversation, a lot of the discussions often analyze the economy at a macro level. That is well and good. GDP, macroeconomic policy, etc., well and good. However, we often miss the nuances that happen at the local level. Up to today, local data, whether at the municipal level or at the ward level or precinct level, is very scanty. That 6th mandate that I spoke about in terms of our responsibilities as SALGA is to try and disaggregate this kind of intelligence so that the business decisions, including the support that is required, can be informed by that. If we could be able to hold each other's hands to continue to build that, when a firm, when the steel industry in CBN closes down, of course it has an impact on the GDP, and we can talk about it in that context. But even more far-reaching is the jobs that are lost for that community. Suddenly the delivery of houses that must be provided for people that suddenly cannot afford bonds. The land that we're starting to see people grabbing land. We have criminalized that on the one level. Of course, we need law and order. But at the same time, somebody who yesterday could afford to pay their own rent or bond suddenly is destitute, and now the only option that they have is to grab land. How does our economic or post-COVID recovery navigate those realities and capitalize, of course, the opportunities that are presented at both the national and global perspectives? I would like to leave it at that, Program Director. I do look forward to the conversations that we'll have. I suspect that coming out of it, it will strengthen both our role as SALGA as well as our partners in navigating the storm and indeed to capitalize on the perfect crisis. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nkatla. I think you've set out the scene very nicely, and it already starts to speak to some of the discussion points that the panelists are going to be sharing their thoughts on. I'm not going to do an elaborate introduction of the panelists. I think they have illustrious careers spanning various sectors in academia, in government, in business. And I believe that the profiles were shared when the invitation went out. So I'm sure we've all had the opportunity to read through and understand who's presenting to us. But what is certain is that there are authorities on the questions at hand. So I will very briefly only look at the work that they've done on, in relation to municipal government, local government, rather than reading their full profiles. And our first speaker is Mr. Mxolisi Mchunu. He's an accomplished town and regional planner who has amassed multidisciplinary skills through serving in diverse management portfolios that include development planning, human settlements, and local economic development. He's an all-round development practitioner and facilitates municipal strategic planning sessions, provides advisory services to municipalities, and conducts training and workshops on pertinent topics in the local government domain. So clearly a speaker with a lot of exposure and experience in local government. The speaker who will follow him is Professor William Gumede, who is currently an associate professor at the Wits School of Governance. He was convener of the local governance leadership and oversight course for the mayor, MECs, and senior executives of the city of Johannesburg. And he was also the principal author of Chapter 6, titled Well-Governed Cities of the State of the South African Cities Report. So again, somebody who's actually spent a lot of time thinking about the state of cities and their governance. Following Professor Gumede will be Ms. Bokang Vumbugani Lepolosa. She's Director for Research and Knowledge Management at the Gauteng Department of Economic Development, with experience spanning over 18 years in different organizations such as the City of Johannesburg. She's also worked for the Department of Economic Development as well as the Nielsen Company, among others. She's also the president of the South African Public Sector Economists Forum. And then finally, we have Professor Pandi Pillay, who will follow Ms. Mbogani, and he's Professor of Economics and Public Finance and the Research Director at the Wits School of Governance. And his recent research in the local government sector includes developing a proper bus fare policy for the city of Johannesburg, a review of community-based planning, also for the city of Johannesburg, and transport planning and planners for the local government SETA. So no doubt, colleagues, and we have 105 participants, so clearly a very important topic, a topic that generates much interest, and no doubt we are in the capable hands of our speakers who reflect on these issues and are the right people to speak to them. So with that introduction of the speakers, I'm going to then move on to the panelists. We have allocated 10 minutes per panelist, and we've agreed that at 8 minutes, I'll just signal that you have 2 minutes left, and then we'll cut it at 10 minutes because we'd really like to have more time for discussion, for the Q&A. Just to remind us all, 5 key questions that the panelists have been asked to address. The first is the impact of COVID-19 on municipal trade and investment. Secondly, COVID-19 economic stimulus strategies for municipalities. Third, strategies that can be explored by municipalities to improve government-business relationships. 4, the use of data to assess investment climate and promote business retention. And finally, how municipalities have responded and what are the best scenarios that local government can undertake to be resilient during the next 2 years. And I guess that's the point that Mr. Nkatli has just made. How do we take advantage, look at the positives and capitalize on opportunities, both domestically, regionally, and globally. Having said all of that, I'm going to move straight then to Mr. Mxolisi Mchunu. Mr. Mchunu, please take the floor and you have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and greetings once more to everyone. I'm not going to really waste any further time on pleasantries. I'm going to get right into it, Chair, and look at the impact of COVID-19 on the municipal economy and what are some of the responses from our side that we can employ to respond to this pandemic. So the problem statement really is well defined and is well known, so I'm not really going to over-elaborate on it. It's something that we are quite familiar with. We know that COVID-19 only served to exacerbate what was an already chronic problem with regards to the economy. And as the leader of local government from our side, it's been our duty to ensure that we keep our finger on the pulse with regards to understanding the landscape. We've been attending different conferences, reading through different material, publications and research and surveys, just so that we can get a sense in terms of what is the current, what is the response of other players in the space, and as such, be able to put together an appropriate response for the sector. And I just wanted to reiterate the fact that as local government, it's not really our role to create jobs. For us, jobs are an outcome of the creation of an enabling environment. And this is also clearly articulated in the white paper on local government. So already we know that the impact of COVID-19 on local government has been severe. The pandemic has completely decimated the municipal revenue base. And even as things stand currently, the outlook remains negative, and this will really affect our ability as a sector to address infrastructure backlog through our own revenue. And also, the revenue collection rates are significantly low, as we know. So this really does, pose, a big challenge for the sector. Also, on the issue of creditworthiness, due to the poor liquidity profile of some municipalities, we expect that it's going to be difficult for them to access different kinds of, different forms of capital outside outside the municipal revenue from the market. So it's only a small number of municipalities that have got a very strong liquidity profile. And also, of course, our downgrade also further served to worsen the situation. And we are saying that despite the disruptive effect of COVID-19, there are some key fundamentals that we think they still remain. FDI remains a major source of investment in the economy, and they will still remain. And also, as municipalities, we have a duty to create an enabling environment for investment to take place in our various jurisdictions. And also, we believe that this pandemic represents a seismic shift in the sense that we are likely to see major disruptions on in global value chains, and also a rise in economic nationalism. And as such, we have to build our own capacity within, ensure that our economy is productive, so that we are able to survive any future global shocks which may arise. But Chair, we are saying that while defining the problem is of fundamental importance, we think that exploring and devising different solutions is of equal significance, if not more. So a few proposals that we are putting forward around ease of doing business. This I cannot really state this enough. The fact that we need to ensure that we make it as easy as possible for businesses to set up and expand in our various localities. We need to harness different public-private partnerships. Now that we will not have the luxury of big budgets as local government, we now need to ensure that the liability that we have of providing infrastructure, in some cases we're able to transfer the liability to the private sector. And we've seen this model work out so well in some parts of the country, like City of Mbombela, Cape Town, and eThekwini as well. So these are some of the options that we can explore. We need to see how best we can address market concentration and inequality through localization of the economy. We must ensure that we create a locally embedded value chains. We also use procurement as leverage to try and create a decentralized economy of smaller job-creating enterprises. Mitigate the effect of external shocks in the economy. Our economy currently is excessively exposed to the external environment, and that became palpable during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we need to find ways to shore up this economy and build a degree of self-containment in key sectors, especially. Our land use model currently is restrictive and does not really facilitate development in a manner that is desirable. So we need to ensure that we introduce a land use regime that allows for experimentation and innovation. And also our land use systems must be re-engineered in a way that they should serve as facilitators and not regulators of development. So as we know that land is one of the key inputs into economic development and is a key enabler. So we've got to make sure that it becomes as easy as possible to secure land rights, to make any development applications, and also ensure that the turnaround time is reduced as far as possible. We need to maximize the local circulation of currencies, of the currency within a locality, in townships especially. There have been a number of studies which have been undertaken around, around this subject. The fact that money which is earned in predominantly Black townships is not spent within, it's not trapped within. So we need to find means to trap that spending, because it's the only way we can create value out of those local economies. So as things stand, whatever is earned, within the locality is expatriated to other, to the surrounding and more established neighborhoods. And this is one of the issues that we need to address as local government. And we think that, in order to make this happen, we really need to build a coherent economic development ecosystem amongst ourselves, local government, different bodies, like academia, development agencies, corporate, and other partners who are within this domain. So it really is incumbent on all of us to build and solidify these partnerships and ensure that there is coherence, and we avoid by all means any forms of duplication and redundance. And in the end, Chair, when all is said and done, we have to be mindful of the fact that job creation is an outcome and it's not a strategy. And for us, really, we need to be seized with the creation of an environment that allows the creation and the multiplication of jobs, and also focus on sectoral development in areas where we have a competitive edge. And not only is this COVID-19 a novel threat, it is also a moving target, meaning that it's very difficult for all of us to predict the true extent of the damage that will be caused by this pandemic. So we have to really rely on prudent scenario planning to anticipate the future and the most likely scenarios in this regard. And also the success of our macroeconomic policy really hinges on a functioning local government, because as a sector, we are the custodians of geographic space. So our macroeconomic policy, in the end, as local government, we are the one who must bring it to fruition, and its success really is incumbent on all of us as local government. So, Chair, from our side, really, this pandemic represents a seismic shift in the way we do things. We have to think differently. We can no longer afford to do things the way we have done them before. And we are certain that, working together, through this whole period of darkness, we have no doubt that through the right partnerships, a silver lining beckons a Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mchunu, and for staying within the time limits. It allows us to have a good Q&A. And just to remind our attendees that the Q&A session will happen after the speakers have delivered their presentations. So if any questions arise as somebody delivers their presentation, please remember to jot it down in the Q&A so that when we get to the Q&A session, we have a good number of questions to pose to the panelists. The next speaker is Professor William Gumede. Professor Gumede, please take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I just wanted to say my screen. There we go. Yes, yeah. Thank you for inviting me. Welcome to those who you came to attend and to listen and to engage. I think I've now set the screen. Can you see from your side?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. I can go ahead. Yes, yeah. No, thank you. What I will try to do is I won't repeat any of what the previous panels says. I'll try to stick within my 10 minutes allocation study now. Just to start off, broadly speaking, the bigger part of the economy, because municipalities, the big economy, the national economy is crucial for, or the state of the national economy is crucial for municipalities, of course, from two levels. The very first level is that municipalities get.
Sorry for disturbing your flow. Can you perhaps just put it in the presentation mode, just so that it fills up the screen? I'm not sure if everybody can see.
It says my screen is sharing, so people did. Can no one see it?
We can see it, but if you just put it in slideshow mode,
okay. Yeah, right. I'll just excuse me. Now you'll have extra time.
I'll give you all of 30 seconds.
There you go. Is this better?
Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. The national economy is important, of course, for two key reasons for municipalities. or the state of the national economy. The first reason, of course, is that most municipalities get the income, and some of them, most of the income from the national fiscus. The second thing is, in terms of the national economy, is that the economy, of course, contract, and the way the economy contracts now, ordinary citizens won't have the income, and it means depletion of the revenue base of municipalities. Now, our economy, from a national point of view, if you look at the figures, it was 2 weeks ago, Stats SA announced the economy contracted 51% on an annualized basis in the 3 months through June 2020. This is the first time in history, in South Africa's history, that the economy contracted 4 straight quarters. And our economy will only be the same size. So in April, June, our economy was exactly the same size as it was the first quarter of 2007. So that's to give you a sense, really, of the economic crisis that we in. And from the sectors, mining declined 73%, manufacturing 74%, construction 76%. It was only agriculture that grew 51%. That really gives you the extent of the crisis. And our economy, if we do everything that we're supposed to do, and I cannot emphasize this, if we do all of the economic reforms that we need to do, the economy will recover. It will take about 4 years for the economy to recover back to pre-COVID-19 levels. But that's only if we do the things we need to do. So this is the longest downward cycle since the Second World War. And unemployment is expected to rise to 50% in the post-COVID-19 period. Business for South Africa, which is the forum for senior CEOs and senior executives of listed companies, they forecasted that up to 4 million jobs could be lost in 2020 alone, in this year alone. I'm not even talking about the other years coming. And the UNDP, in a very recent research paper that came out, they argue that potentially around 54-55% of households may be pushed out of formal jobs and are at risk of falling into poverty. Now, really, from a national point of view and from a municipal point of view, there appears to be a lack of clarity over economic reforms. Now, there is, if there's a lack of clarity over economic reforms, it undermines the recovery. So, I said earlier, our best case scenario is 4 years recovery if we do all of the right things. But if there's a lack of clarity over economic reforms, it pushes our recovery further down the line. So very slow economic reforms means slower economic recovery. If we compare ourselves as a country to our competitors, our peers, other countries, we are one of the few countries really without any plan yet, a proper recovery plan out there, whereas other countries already almost at the start of COVID-19, their COVID-19 had plans and they just adjusted their plan. The second thing is also that our stimulus package, unfortunately, has not been deployed very quickly or efficiently or even imaginatively, because this is we can't do things in the same way as pre-COVID-19. The game has changed, so we have to be a little bit more imaginative, more innovative. So a lot of business, unfortunately, and jobs and opportunities already been lost because of the slow implementation of our package. And then, of course, the return of power cuts and the minor economy. Our peers, our competitors outside, they don't have power crisis. So our power crisis makes it even harder and makes the recovery even longer to come. So we are in a danger potentially of IMF bailout if we don't get this recovery out pretty quickly. And then, of course, there's an issue about IMF bailouts. It would be structural adjustment and austerity and so on. Now, from a revenue point of view, at 2 levels, because of the high levels of unemployment, fewer businesses means shrinking commercial rates, water, power consumption. And also, it's higher levels of indebtedness from business, citizens. We may expect higher levels of defaults. So we've seen, I mean, the figures that has come out of the banks already in terms of defaults at this stage at really, really high levels, in fact, unprecedented high levels. And in many working class, so we have two things socially is happening in the country that before people who were in the middle class, secure, financially secure in the pre-COVID-19 period, will now plunge into poverty. And then many working class South Africans will also end up jobless as factories, business and consumer spending collapse. I mean, just in terms of the figures, and I'm going to give, we've already seen early on the metros, the loss of revenue. Many of our metros, Joburg, Tshwane. Now, because of this economic crisis, we may see a coming public austerity. As you know, the state will have little control from a national point of view to introduce some kind of austerity. In the Treasury forecast, for example, our debt to GDP ratio will be about 81.8%. Our budget deficit will reach 14.6%. So it means austerity would mean cutting budgets, reprioritizing allocations to municipalities. So it just means that less national revenue allocations to municipalities, but at the same time also less internal revenue. So the crisis for municipalities is less money coming from the national fiscus to them, but also less internal revenue from their own services, from citizens, from consumers, from business, and so on, because of the economic difficulties that individual citizens are faced with and businesses are faced with. So it means also, unfortunately, in this coming period, that even the traditional credit control measures is going to be absolutely ineffective because residents' income are diminished. People won't have the money to pay no matter what credit control measures can be implemented. So it will mean some kind of imaginative thinking to deal with this. And also the current IDPs, of course, will be totally irrelevant now. And again, we will need to innovate, be more imaginative in terms of looking at what kind of, what will be a new IDPs.
2 minutes, please.
Oh, okay. Now, 1 minute of it, I was just speaking about. At the same time, while we have this economic crisis, we also have at municipal level capacity crisis, inefficiencies, waste and corruption. Only 21 municipalities received a clean audit in the 2019 financial year. 32 billion was rand loss in fraud during that financial year. And so ongoing culture of lack of accountability, tolerance of transgressions, and so on. So that in itself is also an obstacle, all of that, to delivery in the post-COVID-19 period. Now, unfortunately, also there's going to be a change of the political mood in the country because of COVID-19. The business closures, the rising job losses, and the public finance austerity will change the country's political mood. So we will enter a new era where citizens will be more demanding of public service delivery, there will be more scrutiny on government decisions, there will be more protests on non-delivery, there will be rising rather than less expectations from citizens. And outrage against government will be more violently and fiercely expressed, more land grabs, more informal settlements, more service boycotts. And also it's very likely the next local government elections may unseat many current sitting councillors. So we'll see a sea change in local politics. My last 30 seconds, what to do. First we'll have to fix the political deficit. So before we can even do anything else, we have to bring accountability to the system, efficiency to municipalities. We have to use limited resources more efficiently, cut corruption, inefficiencies and wastage. But when we make the investment investment must be different, must be catalytic. So even infrastructure, there are different types of infrastructure investments. Unfortunately, for most of the post-1994 period, national and at municipal level, infrastructure investment are never catalytic. So it's a different kind of infrastructure. Be more responsive to citizens, and of course fix the financial and governance failures. And then there has to be thinking about shared services between municipalities. I know that has never been a phenomenon, but that must happen going into the future. And then starting to think about the economy different. Where are the areas? The recycle economy is one area, community cooperatives, social enterprises, and then building around the strengths in a municipality, the sector strengths there, building almost clusters of strengths, and then finding new sectors of the future. So sectors in a post-COVID-19 world become more investor friendly, so the ease of business will have to be dealt with. And then for me, there's a great opportunity in municipal social pacts between business, labor, and civil society in a municipality. Now, in South Africa, no one has ever looked at a social pacts at a municipal level, but I think that will be very important going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Prof. Gumede. Our next speaker is Ms. Bokang Vumbungani. Please take the floor, ma'am.
Oh, apologies. I was trying to unmute myself. For some reason, this couldn't work, but I hope everyone can see my screen. Thank you so very much, Chairperson. And
sorry to come in. Maybe if we can just do the same thing as we had asked Prof. Gumede, to just go into slideshow. Thank you.
Okay. As you have rightly pointed out, I am Bokang Vumbungani Lipolesa from the Department of Economic Development of the province. So I'm just quickly going to share two key things which we believe will be important for this forum. Firstly, to add on to what Prof has shared, there is more of nuanced information and evidence pertaining specifically to the Gauteng province. And then I'll quickly move into the response, economic response that the province has put forth, which I believe will be important specifically for the municipalities. And what we've seen so far, I think this Prof has already alluded to, so I'm not going to go into much detail, but the fact is we are continuing to see problems across the board, cross-cutting problems, social and economic problems specifically. And the fact that there's a lot of uncertainty around when things are going to go back to normal, if you're looking at maybe 4 or 5 years from now, that is really a factor to start worrying about. Now, just to share some of the things specifically for Gauteng, I think Prof did mention the big number, the annualized figure, quarter-to-quarter change of 51 at a national level in terms of economic output. Then we then decided to just look at that from a point of view of what Gauteng is likely to have, how Gauteng is likely to have performed. And from that 51% and taking into consideration the fact that Gauteng is not just the finance hub, but is also the economic hub of a country, we have estimated a shrinkage of about 53% on an annualized quarter-to-quarter basis. Now, just to share some of the nuances that may not necessarily be in the public domain at this point in time. These are just the highlights from a survey that we conducted in-house, just to assess the impact, specifically on small businesses within the 5 corridors of Gauteng. So as you can see, we worked on a very small sample. We are building on this. We interviewed only 256 businesses in the province. And what is important from the slide is to know that about 40% of the jobs that the SMEs in these corridors would have ordinarily supported have been cut. And only about 41% of the original jobs will be sustained going forward. There have been problems. Obviously, these are things that would have been expected anyway. Businesses have struggled with issues around revenue, keeping people in the payrolls alive, and some of them have actually closed down. So we do have such statistics. And as I've said, we are going to continue building on this because evidence is very important. And COVID has taught us that we need more evidence now more than ever to be able to deal with problems head on. So again, just following on what I've shared, this is just an indication in terms of some of the sectors that were that bore the most brunt of the pandemic. And as you can see, construction and manufacturing across the different areas in Gauteng were the most hit. And of course, with a touch of some of the subsectors in tourism and of course, professional services. We're expecting that there will be at least, we will be able to sustain or retain some of its businesses because the province does have a plan in place to try to at least resuscitate what is still remaining whilst trying to build the economy again from this point forth. So the base of our economic response as a province is something not new to all of us, I believe, which is the Growing Gauteng Together document, which the Premier always talks about, the GGT 2030 framework. It's an overarching framework for economic development, but we specifically think for this purpose just selected a few action points that are specific and related directly to the economic response that the province has put forth so far. Key to this are issues that have been mentioned already by the first speaker. He did mention the issue of inclusivity, and that's something that the province is driving. It's harnessing strongly. The issues around increased or ramping up productions, just so that should we have similar episodes in future, we know that we would have perhaps well-capacitated SMEs that are able to produce. So we're trying to turn the economy from being more of a consumption, from being a consumption economy to a more of a production economy. And that we can only achieve through ensuring that our SMEs are supported and well capacitated to be able to produce. Alongside that is the issue of access to market, because some of these businesses, in as much as they have existed and they are continuing to exist, there are always issues around market access. So what the province is doing is, it is integrating procurement to ensure that at least market access is granted to all these businesses, especially the small businesses in townships, as I have indicated. Prof did mention the issue of infrastructure, and that's something that the GGT 20 framework is advocating very strongly. We need to ensure that we have catalytic investment, and that we're going to be doing through SEZs. We have also programs structured around infrastructure, and I can give an example of the configuration of the transport node, the major transport nodes within the Gauteng province that the province is going to transform and change into economic hubs. Now we're talking about specifically things like taxi ranks within the townships of the province that are going to now be configured into major economic hubs. So this slide just shares some of there are actually 4 groupings that we have under the economic response. And you'll notice that the first one talks about money. The province realized that people do need money, and that's a reality that's continuing to become more evident to us. So what happened in the beginning is that some companies were provided rental remissions, there were repayment holidays to some companies, but what is important, and that's still ongoing, is the fact that we're working very closely with stakeholders to streamline access to existing national resources, and specifically the relief measures. And you'll notice that across all these, the 2 slides that are going to follow, central to everything, we are talking about partnerships, because we believe that through our existing public-private growth initiative program, we will be able to turn things around even under the circumstances. And also, more equally important is the issue of SMEs, as I have indicated. So there are specific programs in the support programs, both non-financial and financial support programs, that the province has started implementing already to ensure that our SMEs are well capacitated to produce. And then from that production, there will be value chains that will allow SMEs to now take part in the mainstream economy. Importantly, again, as I have mentioned briefly, as I was talking to the GGT 20, is the issue of infrastructure. This is very important, and specifically, we're looking at issues around the configuration of transport nodes, as I have indicated. Imagine a situation where in a taxi rank, maybe Bara taxi rank, you have the taxi rank transformed such that whilst taxi drivers are waiting for their turn to load, they can sit in a corner somewhere and enroll on an online course that's going to take them further from where they are at that particular point in time. Imagine a situation where in the same taxi rank, we have Bokang, who is a student waiting to go home in a queue, but at the same time, there is an environment and a spot where she can actually sit and complete her homework or assignment. And then again, in the same space, we look at, thank you. We're looking at special economic zones, and this is where investment attraction is going to find expression. Again, as I have emphasized, the partnerships become very, very much prominent here. Okay, so I have spoken at length about issues of SMEs and local procurement. So this is again something that we are advocating very strongly. Thank you very much, Program Director. I really, really appreciate the opportunity. These are my details, should there be a need for people to contact me. Thanks once again.
Thank you very much. I disturbed you just before you stopped. Thank you for sticking within the time limit. And our final speaker, I would invite to take the floor, is Professor Pandi Pillay.
Good day, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's not entirely voluntary that we speak here. We have very strong arm twisting on the part of the organizers. But it's a real pleasure for me to be here and to make very small input. The advantage of being the last speaker is that all the important things have already been said. So while I was listening to William and others, I started to delete from my own list of things what I shouldn't repeat. But anyway, let me start by saying that, as William said, it's quite evident to everyone that the investment climate in the country in general is not a very positive one, to put it mildly. But investment is driven, amongst other things, by whether an economy is growing and whether these so-called economic fundamentals, such as the budget deficit, debt levels, and so on, are in the correct dimensions. And it's quite clear that at this point in time, the country is not in a very healthy situation to all of the above. Now, I certainly don't want to sound like a Treasury official, because I think that every crisis brings opportunities. And this particular crisis offers us the opportunity to think more innovatively about economic policy and how we can use economic policy more creatively to address these challenges, these socioeconomic challenges that we are all familiar with, namely the increasing poverty, unemployment, and inequality. And so I think that the dire economic situation that has been described by other speakers does provide an opportunity, I think, to look at more innovative investment strategies. Specifically, I think bottom-up strategies, which I think over the past quarter of a century, we have spoken a lot about, we have written a lot about in terms of white papers and legislation, but we have done very little in terms of implementing them. And I speak specifically, for instance, about local economic development, and also more broadly about the National Rural Development Strategy. I'm particularly concerned, and I want to stress in this presentation, that I would like to speak more about the non-urban and rural municipalities, rather than the metros, which the emphasis so far has been on. Now, I think one of the things that really comes out when we discuss local government as a sphere is that we have to recognize increasingly that it is not a homogeneous sphere. And the levels of development vary enormously from the metros on the one hand to the smaller cities and to the deep rural municipalities. And coinciding with this differentiation in the structure and capacity of our municipalities, the capacity to undertake, amongst other things, local economic development and rural development strategies, for example. And I think what has been constraining the non-urban municipalities to undertake strategies that can lessen poverty, reduce unemployment, and bring them closer to the cities I think there are two really important factors. The first, of course, and both of these are quite obvious. The first is the lack of human resource capacity in many of our municipalities. So while local municipal financial management is often and almost always or mismanagement of finances in many local municipalities is often ascribed primarily to corruption. It seems to me, and while I don't want to underplay the importance of corruption, it seems to me that the much more important factor leading to mismanagement of financial and other resources is the lack of human resource capacity in the majority of our rural and non-urban municipalities. So that's the first issue, the human resource capacity. The second, of course, is local government revenue. Now, there's a world of difference in the revenues that accrue, for example, the city of Johannesburg, and the revenues that accrue to, for example, Lusikisiki municipality in the Eastern Cape. Now, in many of those Lusikisiki type municipalities, there are no resources, no own revenue resources. In other words, resources that they're able to collect themselves, and the only resources they have to undertake the provision of basic services, let alone the local economic development and rural development, are the grants, the equitable share revenues and conditional grants that they get in the form of transfers from the national government. So the question of own revenues and the inability of poor municipalities to generate municipalities is a serious stumbling block to the ability of these municipalities to engender and implement strategies that can address the so-called triple challenges of poverty, unemployment, and inequality. Now, it is not only a question of more resources, but the ability of the poorer municipalities to undertake local economic development is also a function of the lack of efficiency in the way in which they utilize the resources that they currently have. And so it seems to me that when we look at the appropriate COVID-19 economic stimulus strategies that may be necessary, it is quite evident that we have to go beyond what is already in place. And what is already in place is very important, and I'm talking here specifically about things like unemployment relief, the social grants. These are very important measures to address the dire and serious poverty in these areas. But it is not anywhere near enough in terms of what we need to narrow the gap, the development gap between urban and rural. And I think that we have to seek and think much more innovatively about how we can generate more resources to narrow the inequality gap that currently exists. And it is something that we rarely talk about. So we have to think much more innovatively than we are, rather than throw up our hands and say, we have to wait another 10 years before we can get to 5% economic growth, and only then can we address the poverty of the rural areas. This is quite unacceptable, because yet another generation of citizens will be lost to us. And so the challenges of rural non-urban municipalities, the challenges of rural poverty, and of the inequality between urban and rural areas seems to me to be an aspect of policy that is seriously being neglected. And it is not different in many ways from the hidden poverty of apartheid, because the hidden poverty of the rural areas is quite some distance away, both physically and in the imagination of the policymakers. And I think we need to talk much more about economic and social policies that address the Gini coefficient, that inequality measure between rural and urban areas. We talk about the Gini coefficient purely in terms of the differences in inequality and wealth between rich and poor people. Rarely do we talk about the Gini coefficient between the rural and the urban areas. And let me make two final points. The one is about local government business relationships. I think in the context of small municipalities, non-urban municipalities, deep rural municipalities, I think the scope for developing and maintaining sustainable relationships between the local government and the formal business sector is, in my view, a pipe dream. The South African private sector has shown little enthusiasm for government business relationships in general, and even less for local government business relationships, particularly out of the metro areas. So I'm not very positive on that note. And then the final point I really want to make is about data. And it's a point I've made in the context of what is happening in education and in schooling in particular during the period of the lockdown. And the deficiencies, the learning deficiencies that have been magnified between the privileged and the less privileged. And the point I want to make finally about data is that it is time the government looked very seriously at ensuring that Wi-Fi access and the internet is declared a public good. A public good in the same way that we declare education, health, water, and sanitation as public goods. It seems to me that the crisis has exacerbated education inequality between urban and rural, between the wealthy and the poor. And the government needs to work much more seriously with the private sector to ensure how poor children and poor households can have greater access to the internet. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Prof. Pillay. Colleagues, we're going to move into our Q&A session now. As previously mentioned, you can put your questions under the Q&A function on your screen. I'm going to simply take them in sequence. Some are more comments, some are questions, but I'll just go through them. The first one is to Professor Gumede, and it's from Francois S. He's asking, what can be done for South Africa to mitigate the danger of the IMF bailout? So it's more of a broad question that's not so much on, of course it'll have an impact on municipalities, but it's not necessarily directly relating to the municipal issues. I'm going to read the first three, and then we'll take the answers, and then we'll come back. So that was the first one, Prof. Gumede, on the IMF bailout, mitigating the dangers of the bailout. The second is a comment, really, which says the 51% figure should not be used without noting that it only holds relevance if the quarter was to be annualized. So this is in relation to the GDP reduction of 51%. So I don't think that one necessarily needs a response. So let me take two more questions. Why is the transport sector not included in the most affected industry by COVID-19? I guess the question we wanted to say, why is the transport sector not included as the most affected industry by COVID-19, or as one of the most affected? Is it because it's not the highest impacted? This is a question from A.A. Mazibugo. I do recall Ms. Lipolisa talking about the transport sector. So maybe Ms. Lipolisa, you might want to respond to that. You seem to think it is an important sector. Then a question from Hassan Logart. Ms. Bokang talks of the fact that people need money in their hands or households. Why do you not endorse a universal basic income grant like cities such as Berlin and even in Finland and others are attempting? There are campaigns, okay, and then it doesn't quite complete. But essentially that question relates to having a universal basic income grant at city level. So I'm going to request Prof. Gumeta to respond very briefly on the IMF one. Ms. Lipolisa on the one about transport as an important sector. And then finally, the question again, Ms. Lipolisa on a universal income grant at city level.
Right. No, thank you. Let me just respond on the IMF. I mean, it's going to be very important that there is leadership at the center of government, that we have a plan, and a plan that is imaginative and innovative, that we don't base our plan on the past, because, you know, this crisis is the biggest crisis of our generation. The old ways that we thought about things is unfortunately not going to work. The old ideologies, unfortunately, has come to crash on this crisis. So really it's going to be very important. And how should the plan be put together? We'll have to bring all of the skill sets in South Africa together, the resources to think around an integrated plan. If you think it will only be the government will be the only group that can come up with a plan, the plan will fail. Or if it's just the ANC, it will fail, I'm afraid to say. So, you know, when one is in a crisis, this is, as I said, it's the biggest crisis of our lifetimes. You, as a country, will have to bring every set of skill and every set of idea, be inclusive as possible. And then the second thing is the social pact. So we may need to have, and it's going to be, I think, very important, building social pacts at a national level. And of course, as I said, in the municipal level. But just as a response directly to the question, when I say a social pact, we'll have to bring, you know, where business, organized labor, civil society, the unemployed must also be part of the pact. So we have to look at a pact, a social pact at the national level. Then we have to look at sector pacts. And then, of course, you know, at the municipal level, we should start thinking about pacts in that way also. But the pacts, again, will have to look much more different from the way that we've been thinking about pacts, social pacts. And one of the things is we have to be the stakeholders, the social partners in this crisis pact will have to be much wider than currently NetLab or so on. So it must include the unemployed, it must include civil society, and it must include professionals. Now, we've never thought about it that way, but this is the crisis of our lifetime. And it will mean that we have to almost clean the slate and say to ourselves, everything that we've done before will be absolutely ineffective. So how do we come up with something new? Unless we do that, we will come up with the same type of policies, the same issues, or actually with no policies because we can't make decisions, because we're paralyzed, too many different opinions, and we can't take a leadership. And then we will end up with the IMF having to bail us out.
Thank you. Ms. Lipolisa?
Okay, thank you so very much, Doc. I tried to look through the questions and I don't seem to be winning, but it's okay. I think I have had you, but correct me if I'm not addressing the one that's asked head on. So the first one was about why transport is important or not important. If you can just quickly
Yes,
help me out?
the person initially had written that, I think that what they're saying is they didn't feel that there was enough discussion about transport as an important sector. And I'm saying, I recall in your presentation, you did mention transport. So you might want to expand on that and how you see it in Gauteng as being of strategic importance.
Okay, no problem. Thank you so very much for that. Yes, indeed, transport plays a vital role within economies because remember, it enables a lot of things, you know, exchange between people, just not talking about local communities, and also exchange between different economies. You know, without transport, we cannot be able to move goods around. And if you remember correctly, the economy is about goods, it's about people, it's about everything else. So yes, indeed, it is very important. And I think one thing that we probably don't have much evidence on at this point in time as a province is the fact is that the lockdown restrictions had a very adverse impact on the way the transport sector has been running. However, the details and the finer grainy evidence that is required in that aspect is at this point in time not at our disposal. But we have made plans, as I've indicated, that there are massive changes that we are envisaging as a Gauteng province within the transport sector. There are plans in place, there are programs in place to ensure that we transform the sector, not only to assist the sector, but because it's also a sector that is required by other sectors to thrive. So I hope I have addressed that. And then secondly, there was something about the
having a grant, a universal basic income grant, and the example of Berlin was cited as one of the cities that has implemented that. Why don't you have that in South Africa?
Okay, I think this may not necessarily be for myself, but let me give my view on it. We COVID, I mean, the situation now is presenting a lot of things to us. We need to rethink how things have been done in the past. And if there is a need for us to start considering certain things like such grants, then I think now is the time for us to try to think back and try to implement some of these things. We need to allow flexibility with the evidence that's been presented now by the situation. We need to use that evidence to allow flexibility in us, you know, doing things differently and ensuring that we address issues and the needs as they arise. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. There's a question here on the district development model. This is from Musi Muraka, who says local government in South Africa is generally characterized by inadequacies, such as inadequate funding model, inadequate capacity in the form of quality of councillors and officials without requisite skills and so on. And the question is, do you think the district development model, if properly implemented, can lay a firm foundation for this? And I think maybe it hasn't been directed at anyone, but Mr. Mchunu, I think this would be a useful question for you to address. There's another question that I'd like to direct to Mr. Mchunu. The person, Kolile Kosi, says practical guidance with regard to using procurement as leverage for job creation and economic stimulus for recovery will assist. And I think this refers to the presentation you made where you talked about using procurement as leverage for job creation and assisting SMEs. So those two questions for you, Mr. Mchunu, and then I'll come back.
Thank you very much, Chair. On the district delivery model, which was launched by the President at Ortambo last year, certainly we do see it as a vehicle for ensuring, bring about some degree of efficiency in the delivery of service. And I must just also indicate the fact that what the delivery model is doing is it is compelling us to actually do what already is legislated, what we are meant to do anyway, and that is work in a coordinated manner. So with the model, we'll be having planning will be centralized, and the execution thereof be having one plan, one budget, and all, of course, centralized at a district municipality. So this will ensure that there is a degree of coherence in the execution of government programs and different kinds of interventions at a local level. So certainly it's something that will bring about a lot of improvement in how we deliver services as government. On the issue of local procurement as a lever to stimulate local demand, If you look at our existing preferential procurement regulations, they do make a provision for targeted and preferential procurement. But what we are saying is that we need to be more deliberate and more aggressive in this regard. But that being said, as local government, if you look at our spending power, it is not as much compared to other different departments, say like Sandral, for instance. We've got a much greater spending capacity, and so it's really it's for all of us, not just municipalities, but we need to create some form of consistency around how we can have this one approach of ensuring targeted procurement, because if it's done in isolation, then it might not yield the outcomes that we desire. So it's not just for local government, but we are looking at this as an all-of-government approach, where we actually employ this targeted procurement as a means to stimulate local demand and also create employment. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Pillay, a question from Hassan Logat. Says, Professor Pillay, I agree with you that the marginalized must be the center of economic regeneration, but how can SALGA in particular be a partner in fighting inequality? I ask in particular, how can we rebuild the new politics to turn around the marginalization of local government and make it a center for building an inclusive and democratic politics? Prof. Pillay.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, as I understand it, SALGA is an association for all of local government. So it has a duty and a responsibility to narrow the development gap between the urban and non-urban municipalities. But at the same time, I don't think we should saddle SALGA with the burden of reducing inequality in the country, although it does have a role to play. I think this is fundamentally a challenge to government to address the inequality in the country and its various manifestations. The government speaks less and less about inequality and more about poverty. Well, poverty is relatively easy to address, in terms of grants and so on. But inequality is the big challenge, because inequality, leaving aside the very serious social implications, does have devastating economic implications in terms of its constraint on growth, for example. So when you hear government talking about the constraints to economic growth, you will never, repeat never, hear about the impact of inequality on economic growth. So Hassan, I think that this is a challenge that goes beyond SALGA, although I do think that SALGA can be a very important role player in stimulating the dialogue around on the relationship of inequality and local economic development. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question from Annaline Foster, who's asking, is there any way that we can minimize red tape, that is ease of doing business, that MFMA and PFMA places on those who want to do business without moving towards corruption? So how do we minimize red tape without encouraging corruption? How do we do things quicker and not make sure that that makes people skip the processes that are required by policy and legislation? I'm not sure who's best placed to respond to that. I think, again, between Ms. Lepolisa
I could come in there, yeah, if I could come in just in terms of that. Yeah.
That Mr. Nkun?
No, this is
okay.
Okay. Yes, yeah, let me just come in terms of, it is going to be absolutely important that red tape is going to, reduce, and corruption and waste and so on. Because our situation now is there is constrained resources So it means that we'll have to be more efficient at a municipal level. And part of their efficiency is going to be to improve the capacity internally, the internal capacity. There was a question around there also, I think it's linked to this question about internal capacity. Unfortunately, for the last couple of years, is that we've got a capacity problem at municipalities, but often the capacity problem is because of the indifference to attract talent. Unfortunately, appointments in many municipalities has been very politically connected, very factional based, very patronage based, and very corrupt. So appointments often being captured, which then undermines the capacity of municipalities. So that's the first thing that really is going to we have to deal with. Of bringing in the talent, because we've got a talent in the country, we have the talent in the communities, but the talent are not being used by municipalities. The second thing is, I think citizens must start to monitor efficiencies of municipalities more. You know, often what municipalities do, or not only municipalities, but government, national departments, we bring in consultants to look at the efficiencies and so on. But a cheaper way would be to bring in citizens, where citizens look at what's happening and then they complain and the complaints are followed up. That definitely, if there is accountability in terms of complaints from citizens, it really will also increase our efficiency, and it also would be cheaper. And maybe I'll use the opportunity. There was a question about income grants. Of course, there's going to be a budget problem, so we don't have the kind of budgets like in Chicago and Berlin and so on. But it is going to be very important from a national point of view that we extend the current grants, this COVID-19 grants for much longer, for beyond this period. But I think we need to innovate then. So it's not just a grant continuing, but how do we innovate in that space? So first part of the innovation would be, can we link this grant to training, so that people pick up skills, and then at least we can then start to deal with inequality also. So you get a grant, but can we then transition you to another skill set, which is important in the post-COVID-19 world. Then the second part of that grant is to bring some civic responsibility. If you get a grant, there are certain things. Can you volunteer 1 day or 2 days a week to go clean your own streets? To look up, to walk around the school in your area to make certain there's no crime and so on. So we just have to be innovative in that way of rethinking whatever we're doing.
Okay, thank you.
Nomfundo?
Yes, Kamantha, I can hear you.
So there are some questions that's coming through from Facebook that I'm putting onto the chat for you privately. So just so that we want to include our Facebook viewers as well. So maybe in the next round of questions, just please include theirs as well.
Okay. Thanks for highlighting that. I think before I go to those, just a question to Professor Pillay, because you've raised a very critical point. Because I've been seeing a lot of, certainly the commentary that's been coming out in the media, as well in some of the discussion forums similar to this one about COVID-19, there seems to be more and more emphasis or calls for public-private partnerships. And in fact, I think even Mr. Mthunu, he started one of his first proposals on how to go forward was on public-private partnerships. And yet, Professor Pillay, you're saying that in your view, the private sector is not particularly keen or coming to the party. Can you just expand on that a bit? Because clearly with the state having such fiscal constraints and with the state leaning more towards these partnerships, if your sense is that we don't have sufficient will or interest from the private sector, the question becomes, firstly, why is that? And secondly, how do we turn that around?
Do you have an easy question?
That's as easy as it's going to get.
Well, I think that one has to look at the history of South African capitalism. And you don't have to go very far back. If you look at what South African capitalism has been doing in South Africa over the past quarter of a century, it is quite easy to draw the conclusion that working with government on development issues is not one of their priorities. Their priorities are, amongst other things, locating to other countries in the world. If you take Anglo-American as the classic example, it exploited minerals from this country for over a century. Come the demise of apartheid, they prepared to leave and be based somewhere else, and ditto for several other countries. The second evidence I will quote is about pricing and collusion in setting prices. I mean, the Competition Commission, for example, has exposed the behavior of South African capitalism around fixing prices, even on basic commodities, such as bread and so on. And so the structure of South African capitalism, the monopolistic nature of the economy suggests that profit making is all that it is interested in. There is very little evidence from the private sector. Of course, there are individuals here and there that donate to in substantial sums of money at this time, but there isn't a commitment on the part of South African capitalism to hold hands with government and say seriously, we can do this, we can take this country to another level of development. I know this may sound cynical, but I've yet to see the evidence on the part of capitalism, even amongst the new quote unquote black capitalists, that they're any different from the old white capitalist regime. So unless there is some evidence that I'm missing, I'm not seeing capitalism stepping forward to saying, we can address this with you. What they're saying is create an environment in which the economy can grow. We only need 2% growth in their view, because 2% is great for the wealthy. But 2% growth does not help the poor. So there is sufficient evidence, in my view, to be quite cynical about this proposal that the government and business can hold hands and walk along this developmental path that we so urgently need. Thanks.
Thanks, Prof. Pillay. I'm going to take the last question from Sfiso Ndaba, who says, what are the new governance capacities that have been built by municipalities in general while responding to COVID-19? And what measures do you have in place to ensure that those new governance capacities are not lost post-COVID-19? Who can take maybe Mr. Mchunu on as SALGA, as capacity building is one of your focus areas. You might want to speak to that, to say what governance capacities have you seen being developed as a result of COVID-19, and what measures do you want to put in place to ensure that you don't lose the momentum of those capacities that have been developed?
Okay, thank you, Chair. If there's one thing that COVID-19 has demonstrated is the immense capacity of the sector and of the sector at large to respond when called upon to do so. So the emergency that was brought about by COVID-19 really was able to demonstrate the extent to which we are able to respond timelessly when situations when we are called upon to do so. If you look at how we're able to expedite the delivery of some services, for instance, such as water, shelter for homeless, and other services which were needed urgently as a result of COVID, and also we're able to facilitate approvals for the construction of facilities which were badly needed for COVID. So it did demonstrate to us that we do have the capacity. Perhaps it was the fact that we were very complacent, before, when we did not have an emergency of this kind. So this is really this is the kind of capacity that we feel we have built, and also the whole mindset shift, because by being able to deliver this kind of services within such a short space of time and under such difficult circumstances, we're able to kind of create a new mindset that even without COVID, even after we've long defeated this pandemic, we should be able to maintain the same level of consistency. So for us as SALGA, we are looking to further inculcate this kind of culture even after the pandemic. You know, in that we are approaching the end of this term for our councillors. So as and when we begin with a new term, we do have a number of programs which are lined up. One of them, you know, is around the councillor induction program, where we are inducting, you know, new councillors who will be coming in for the next term. But also even amongst with our officials as well, we've got different programs to build capacity among senior managers and officials in different portfolios. So we are really going to ensure that we put more emphasis in those programs and try and really drive this a new mindset, try and entrench a new mindset, you know, in local government around the speed at which we should be delivering services, and also the responsiveness as well, because that is what we saw during this pandemic, and we want to see that throughout, even after the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we colleagues have all managed to see some of the questions that have come through from Facebook on the webinar chats. So as I call on the panelists to make their final remarks, I would also request them to reflect if there are any questions that they would like to respond to that have been raised by our participants from Facebook. Please do go ahead and respond to them. But in this segment where you give your concluding remarks, I'd like us to focus specifically on the last point of the questions that you were asked to talk to. And that is, what are the best scenarios for local government, or what are the best scenarios that local government can undertake to be resilient during the next 2 years? And I want to link that specifically to the opening remarks that were made by Mr. Nkatle, who said one of the objectives of this meeting is to say what potential lies there. Yes, there are a multitude of problems, but what potential have we identified, and how can we capitalize on the opportunities that arise? And in this case, with a view to saying in the next 2 years, here's how we can build resilience for municipalities. So that's what I'd request our panelists to focus on. And maybe this time we can start from the back going forward. Professor Pillay.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll make 3 points, and I'll end with your question about the best scenarios. The first one I will make is really about the economy, and that is that to re-emphasize the point that I made in the presentation. And I think there's a complete absence of innovative thinking around macroeconomic policy. And the scenario is whatever that is being painted by government officially is a very gloomy one, which is really doesn't provide much comfort during this crisis. And that is that we have to be concerned about debt reduction, reducing the deficit, and growth will come. Well, growth might come, but the important question is when and how much, and who will benefit from that growth. And these are not the questions that we are putting to our policymakers. Rather, we quite meekly absorb the propaganda that is foisted on us almost on a daily basis. The second point, which Eric has raised both in the chat and in the question, is around human capacity, which of course is often raised in terms of the ability of local government to function effectively. I think this is a very complicated, very deep question that cannot be solved by a series of training programs. I think the gaps in human capacity that we find between the 3 spheres of government is fundamentally a function of the deficiencies, the serious deficiencies in our education and training system that continues to perpetuate the apartheid inequalities, but no longer on a racial basis, but rather on a regional basis. And then the final point I make in response to your question, Chair, is about what are the best scenarios for the next 2 years? Well, I think it depends on who you are and where you are. If you are in the city of Johannesburg, the scenario is slightly more optimistic than if you are in a deep rural municipality. If you are in the latter, if you are in the municipalities that are in the former Bantustans, the situation is one of abject hopelessness. And citizens there are surviving, merely surviving on the social grants that the majority of them receive. In the metros, on the other hand, the scenario is much more optimistic, because even if growth is not happening because of the constrained external factors, growth will and does happen because the metros are much better equipped to stimulate in metro economic growth and development to some extent. But overall, the best scenario is at best, a less gloomy one than it would be for, I think, the large part of the country. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Lepolisa?
Okay, thanks, Chair. Just reiterating what Prof has just said, there's no blanket approach to this. We have to be very specific as to what key problems exist within our different municipalities and address those problems head on. It is very important, and I think this platform has advocated the use of evidence. So it is important for municipalities to go back, check the existing evidence, to assess and identify the key problems and challenges within different municipalities, be it corruption, be it mismanagement of funds, or whatever. Then we address those head on. What is important, I think, going forward, given the uncertainty that has come with the pandemic, is the issue of, collective implementation of these things that we are saying we're putting forth. Investors have literally lost hope. Yes, there is some level of optimism, although it's not really the level at which we would want. It is important for us to start thinking about our value propositions. What can we sell to investors as individual municipalities, and build on that? I believe that will take municipalities further from where they are. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kodisa. Professor Gumede?
Yes, thank you. I think I'll start off with capacity, human resources in municipalities. If you look since the Second World War, the countries that have done really well, they started at the same level after the war as poor countries. The one single thing they've done was, in terms of human resources, getting the most capable people to be in government and to run it. And that is the mistake that we in South Africa post 1994 appear not to have done. We've got a talent in the country. There's talent in the rural areas. There are talent in the cities, but we just, on purpose, for political reasons, for factional reasons, for corrupt reasons, don't appoint the best people in the area to work for municipalities or for government departments. And that's really, I think we have to be honest about it. That is why we're struggling with capacity. So we can do all of the training, and I've been doing training for 3 decades now. It really is not going to change to make much of a difference unless we start off by saying, in a community, where are the skill set? Can we bring people into municipalities, into government to build the capacity? The second issue that I want to talk about is, business, because it's going to be absolutely crucial for municipalities to attract business and attract investment. And it's not easy to, it's not going to be easy to do that. And yes, you know, our variety of capitalism, because there are many varieties of capitalism. It's not just one capitalism. And unfortunately, you know, for the last 100 years in South Africa, our variety of capitalism is a really narrow one, a very Anglo-Saxon one. And there's, you know, multiple varieties of capitalism, which is much more inclusive, more stakeholder-driven, and, you know, so many. I mean, you could put up your hand and name different type of capitalism. Yes, so that is true. But still, having said that, unfortunately, our municipalities have often, you know, because they perceive to be corrupt, to be mismanaged, not to get the right human resources there. If you're a business, because business is, when you make these decisions, if there's red tape, your business will fail. So, you know, people make decisions also, on the other hand, on, you know what, if I can't get anything right here, this municipality, I can't get a form, I can't, you know, be treated rudely and so on, my business is going to fail, I better move to another place. So those are the things that we really have to fix. On the other hand, our municipalities, so that they can become more friendly, more kind, more effective in order to attract business. Because if we don't do that, we can criticize as much as we want about the type of capitalism in a country, but we must also make and be honest and make the changes at home, which we need to do. And then lastly, just in terms of the kind of innovations that we need, you know, what are the opportunities? Because, you know, in every crisis there are opportunities, and I think there are opportunities. For me, the first of the opportunities really is, can we at a local level, as a municipality, whether it's rural or urban, build social enterprises? Can we take a street, for example, and say, in this street, let's count who have what kind of skills in this street. Can we then create a company out of the street, or which become a cooperative, a social enterprise? Can we get individuals, can we now start individuals to grow their own veggies now? We make it a campaign by the municipality to release their half of food that people can produce their own thing, even if it's just, if they have, you know, in their small yards to do that. I mean, there's renewable energy, for example. If we have a power problem, can we locally in a municipality get a community to do their own kind of energy initiatives? And can we, for example, I mean, SALGA can still lobby for, you know, for the social grant to continue. And then can we then link a social grant to everyone who gets a social grant to also to start cleaning a day of the week in their town, in their area, and do community safety type of thing, you know, which will then reduce, of course, also, but it will build solidarity, and it will build civic responsibility. So, you know, and this is just a few of the many type of opportunities that is open to us. And lastly, my sense is the change of the political mood because of COVID-19 may mean there will be some political instability at a municipal level. We may not see the same councillors. You know, some councillors will not be re-elected again because people are desperate and they will want other people to represent them. So we also have to think about how do we manage instability going forward during this crisis.
Thank you very much. And finally, Mr. Mchunu.
Thank you. I must, on my side, also echo the point that has been raised around capacity. And by capacity, I'm not referring to numbers in a numerical sense, but building capacity in a sense that we bring in the best expertise to local government, and that the best and the brightest of minds must be deployed to local government. It just makes more sense because this is the one sector that is a frontline sphere of government where basically all forms of delivery and economic activity takes place. So I think it's incumbent on all of us as SALGA and as government as a whole to ensure that we basically deploy the best talent at local government. That would be a big step in turning around the fortunes of the sector and embarking on this journey of economic recovery. So that is the one point. And I think that's the second one. If you look at our economic recovery efforts now, local government has to be at the forefront. Our 8 metros, they hold a sizable share of the economy and contribute extensively to the economic output of the country. So the economic recovery must be led, that must be led by local government, and we have to position ourselves adequately to ensure that we are ready to lead in that regard, with regards to economic recovery. And with regards to the different scenarios that one can envisage, if you're looking at where we are, local government specifically, and this is something that also as SALGA we've been hard at work on and advocating for, the issue of consequence management, where wrongdoing can be detected early enough, and that where there can be consequences for any form of wrongdoing, because it's only through such that it's only through consequence management that you can create some form of some sort of a deterrent against any form of wrongdoing and corruption. So there is the local government that we envisage, where there are strong consequences and where municipal officials do what is expected of them. Lastly, Chair, is the equitable share model that as SALGA we've been long trying to lobby for a different kind of model that takes into account different factors and also different variables. So if you look at local government itself, from the national fiscus, we receive quite a small portion in that regard, and that is incomparable with the kind of responsibility that we have to shoulder as a sector. And also the fact that the macroeconomic policy and as well as the economic situation nationally has a direct impact on our ability as a sector as well to function, since there is a proportional since it's proportional to our ability to also collect revenue. So that is what the scenario that we see, where there's going to be a whole realignment of how we support local government with regards to financial resources. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Mr. Nkunu, and thank you very much to all our panelists for your reflections. There's so much that you've put out and so much that could have been expanded on, both from the panelists and also the questions that we were not able to cover simply because of time. But the good thing is that this is being recorded, and I think SALGA will certainly be able to go through the records of the meetings and see what are some of the issues that need to be teased out further and some of the ideas that have emerged. I'll do brief conclusions in a short while, but before I do that, I'm just going to call on Mr. James Madzie from SALGA to just give us an update on revenue performance of Gauteng municipalities during the hard lockdown. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to be very brief. Thank you for that wonderful engagements that we had earlier. A good mixture of academia and government, I have to admit. Mine is going to be very quick, focusing on what happened really in the 3 months leading to the end of the financial year for the government. I did not see anyone touch on what was the requirement for local government in terms of the COVID-19 directives. Some were local government mandates, but others unfortunately were not. And that's the one area where SALGA really advocated for additional funding in order for municipalities to be able to respond to COVID-19 effectively. Just in terms of what happened in the first 3 months of lockdown, just like all the speakers had already mentioned, Mr. Nkulu, Mr. Nkolusi, Professor Kumede, they touched on the young status situation that we're in. And then of course, the economic recession that we had as well. And then in terms of COVID-19 requirements that I just highlighted, there were additional requirements for municipalities to spend, and there was an impact on capital grants as well. And then, of course, in terms of debt impairment as well, there was an increase in irrecoverable debts due to people staying at home, not going to work, a lot of people losing their jobs. And then, of course, there was an impact as well on the balance sheet. And this, in the long term, will have an effect on municipal creditworthiness as well. And then in terms of institutional underspending, there were a couple of activities that municipalities could not do because of lockdown. And I believe that there was a bit of clawback there in terms of costs, but there was also a suspension of capital projects due to lockdown, which essentially meant that there were a lot of capital grants that were not spent and had to be taken back to government. And then just to touch on the actual numbers themselves, the topic says I must focus on the fourth quarter, but I felt that there'll be better context if I give a picture of the full year in terms of how the province performed. So I'll also provide a comparative analysis as well of 2019. So what you're looking at there is the data from the National Treasury Database, Section 71 reports that came out in August. And the percentages there are actually what was budgeted to be collected by municipalities versus what was the actual revenue. And when you look at the metros, you can see that the metro that performs the worst there is City of Tshwane, that was able to perform at 79%, almost 80%, as compared to 97% last financial year. And then when you go to the districts, again, you look at Mfuleni, which actually did well there in terms of collection as compared to last financial year, and all the other municipalities in the district of Sijibeng performed fairly well. And I will not touch on the districts for the purposes of this exercise, so I will not touch on Sijibeng and West Rand. And then when you go to West Rand district, the worst performing municipality for the financial year of 2020 was Mohale City, which moved from 96%, 97% to 70%. And of course, the other two municipalities, there were declines, but they were also within the 90% bracket. Now, in looking at these numbers, overall for Gauteng, there was a movement from 97.7% to 91.1%. So there's a 6.6% decline year on year for the province. And when I looked at these numbers, I actually had a further interest in what the national picture was in terms of revenue collection for 2020. And when you look at the slide here, you look at Gauteng here in the middle, I highlighted it. The average for all the provinces for 2020 is 85%, with two outliers, the best performing province being Western Cape with 97%, even better than last year if you look at the numbers, and the worst performing province being the Eastern Cape. And this really resonates with Professor Pandey's example of Lusikisiki in terms of that mainly rural province with a lot of homelands that would have challenges around revenue. There's a movement here, which is, I think, is the most drastic actually, 90% to 62%. And then when you look at the average for 2019, I believe it's standing at around about 93%. So all in all, you get the picture of the impact of COVID-19, the 3 months of pure hard lockdown. And I think that the picture will still get worse for this financial year, because at that period in time, municipalities still had a lot of reserves and they really made up for the collection of the last 3 months before the hard lockdown. So I really believe that we'll see a far more worse picture when we look at the 2021 financial year. And with that, moderator, program director, this is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Matsie. There was actually a question which correlates with your presentation that I couldn't get to from Tembewena Tsembe. And Tembewena is saying, we see that the West Rand remains the area that loses or has shed most jobs, noting further the continued decline of the mining sector. What is the provincial government program to enable potential economic sectors in this district, such as agro-processing, tourism, etc.? I don't know if you're in a position to answer that.
Sure. I don't want to even commit to it. I'm not in a position to answer to that question, really.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that
okay.
is fine. Thank you very much. I just want to check if there was anything in action. I'm just checking in the Q&A. No, I don't see anything. Samantha, unless you are picking up something in relation to this presentation in particular.
Not in this one, but there was a question that someone really wanted answered. Give me a...
Actually, I'm spotting one from Eric. It says, does this take into account the AG's report, which red flagged other municipalities? Were there any municipalities red flagged by the Auditor General in Gauteng?
Well, there definitely were. The one good example would be Mfuleni, which was red flagged. But the data that I used is unaudited data. It's from the Section 71 report. So for the purposes of this question, I think they will probably get a good answer a year from now when the AG audits the municipalities around revenue performance.
Okay, no, thanks for that. Samantha, you said there was a question that needed answering?
Yes, I've just sent it to you, or do you want me to read it out? I'm not sure if this has been covered during the session, but I just want to check with you. So it says municipal debt to household is real money, but given the COVID-19 impact, is it highly likely that debt will not be recovered, and what can be done? Can debt be cancelled for households?
Okay, Mr. Matsie?
Well, I guess I can attempt that one, definitely. Yes, one of the major things for this period was how there was a major expectation from government, to local government specifically, to be sensitive to citizens and provide them with discounts around rates and taxes. And ultimately, one of the proposals that we had made at SALGA when we were encouraging municipalities to start reprioritizing their budgets was to look at incentives in terms of how they can encourage citizens to start paying for their services. The challenge of cutting or rather I would say writing off debts is that it does create a element of moral hazard for the citizens, in the sense that there might be a situation where people might see an opportunity to not pay for their services because know that in the long run, local government will definitely reduce, or rather will write off some of their debts. So for me, the argument there would be some of the proposals that we could come up with, which you have already come up with as well as SALGA as well, is to say, we would come up with a proposal of a replacement of meters, for example, for citizens, whenever they want to their debts to be written off, because usually debts accumulate through conventional meters. So when you put in prepaid meters, then it's pay as you go, and there's no real chance that you can actually incur debts. So one of the proposals that we have come up with, the SALGA, is that one of the incentives for citizens to agree to debts being written off is to be able to buy a prepaid meter, so that you can be in a position where you can only use what you can afford. With other services like your rates, really, we would not encourage municipalities to write off rates as debts. Rather, we could carry them forward. And when the citizen is in a position to pay those rates, then they can pay whatever is due to municipalities. But we cannot write off everything, because that will cripple the institution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Colleagues, I think I'm going to try and pick up some key themes that have come out of this discussion. And I'm quite certain I won't do it any justice, because there's just so much to digest, but I've tried to lump them together, and they kind of speak to the discussion points that were on the program. I think the first thing that came through very strongly is the need for using evidence. I mean, I thought it was interesting that the Gauteng has done, even though a relatively small sample, but nonetheless a survey to understand what is actually the situation on the ground. And I want to go back to the point by Prof. Pillay on the rural areas almost feeling left out. I'd be very interested, for example, to see what kind of data is being collected by SALGA on the impact of COVID-19 in the rural areas, both in the formal and the informal economy. So I think one of the things that's coming through very clearly here is that as part of the programs of SALGA, we need to understand what it is that we are dealing with and what our solutions are geared towards. And we need to have that data very, very speedily. And I don't know if SALGA has an infrastructure that rolls out these kinds of surveys and on the ground research in a way that won't necessarily, lead us to wait for a year from now before we have the results, but really be on the ground all the time to have quick responses or a quick sense of what's happening. The second one is the issue of the social compact, and the issue of corruption has been coming up as well. And I think the social compact is critical, particularly at a time when corruption is seen to be at its peak. If there's one thing that COVID, I think, has revealed, the Eastern Cape certainly learned this when they realized that they were really struggling at some point to keep up with some of the interventions that they were trying to implement in the communities. They then started using districts, the district model, and getting people, communities within the various districts to assist, to partner with the Department of Health, the Department of Social Development, and so on. And I think the social compact is exactly the kind of engineering that you need to be able to have those community structures that you can quickly and readily activate in times of crisis. I think the one thing we mustn't forget is, yes, while we are looking at what do we do in the next 2 years or so, evidence, or at least data that is being put out internationally, points to these types of crises recurring. So this COVID-19 is most likely not a once-off thing. We're likely to have these kinds of crises happening in future. We don't want to find ourselves at local government level, starting from scratch, saying, okay, how do we bring in the communities? How do we get participation, whether it's for food pack distribution or for tracking and tracing, whatever interventions that you need. You don't want to start from scratch. And the only way that you can really have solid institutions on the ground to be able to run in times of crisis, and even outside of crisis, is to have the strong social compact where everybody has an understanding of what the respective roles of government, of society, and what it is that we do collectively to make sure that our municipalities or local government actually functions. And I think it would be very useful for SALGA to start reflecting on how do you engineer the social compact at a local level. And I think Prof. Gumede was correct. A lot of the time, the literature talks about social compacts at a national level, but if you look at resilient social compacts, even if you look in post-crisis states, they tend to be localized. So that's one point for SALGA to look at. And in fact, local government may end up leading the way, because I think even at national government level, we need the social compact, and maybe local government can certainly show us how best to approach this. Then the issue of the business relationship has come through very strongly. Clearly a lot of mistrust and perceptions of apathy on the part of business. But I think what has come through is that first, there needs to be very clear value proposition. And again, this issue of urban versus rural. What are the plans? But more importantly, what is the value that can be derived by both the local government as well as business from being so integrally involved in the rural and urban landscape? So the value proposition is something that I think SALGA would certainly have to guide the various municipalities in terms of developing that for their engagements with business. I think as part of that, in this business relationship, is this issue that kept coming up about strategic sectors. What are the strategic sectors that we should be targeting? Because it's one thing to talk broadly about a business relationship, but I think depending on the municipality that you are in, you probably want to prioritize certain business engagements over others based on the sectors that are of strategic importance to you. So perhaps SALGA can develop some form of generic, if they don't exist already, some form of generic guidelines on specific sector engagements. So these guidelines on these sector engagements would, one, say to you, firstly, take a step back. Those guidelines should be informed by engagements between SALGA and business to understand what are the interests of business in local governments, whether it be rural or urban. What kind of business relationship would, or rather what kind of symbiotic relationship would business like to develop with local governments? And once that has been clarified, and the kind of sectors where you are likely to attract more business, you then have some kind of guideline from SALGA to assist municipalities, because obviously certain municipalities, for example, have got perhaps, certainly in the metros, they may have stronger research units than in some of your smaller municipalities or some of your rural municipalities. I think there's really a role for SALGA to provide these guidelines on what are the strategic sectors, what is the value proposition that we would like to bring before business in relation to these sectors, and on the basis of that, start guiding municipalities on how you foster these relationships in a way that can actually be mutually beneficial. Because even if business seems not interested, there's no business that'll walk away from value that they can see can accrue to their business. And so in a way, it becomes also incumbent on local government to harness those relationships and develop the value proposition. On the issue of the universal grant, there seems to be a nexus between the grant, jobs, and skills. So there was a proposal, for example, that maybe we shouldn't just look at it purely from a grant, a transfer coming from the state to individuals, but perhaps, or from the state to either from the state to individuals or from the state to small businesses. But perhaps we can also look at it as a, for lack of a better word, a quid pro quo. So the state provides the relief through the grant, but in return, as a citizen, also to engender civic responsibility and sense of community service, you can say either A, I receive a skill as well, so I go and I work and I get trained in a certain area. Skill, at least I'm doing my part, whether it's through the examples that were given of cleaning the city or providing any other form of community service. So you can do a skills development component, but you can also do just a general community service component. That way the grant is not just seen as something that is a direct transfer in return for no other developmental value. Then the issue of human capacity is another one that has come through repeatedly. And here I must say, it's not really clear what exactly the issue is, because even if you look at the comments, there are some that say, but we do have well-educated, highly qualified people in municipalities. And again, I'm sure it would depend on which municipalities you're talking about. So there's the question of the training, formal training and skills development. There's the question of opportunities being given beyond political party affiliation, beyond corruption in access to jobs. And then there's also the question of what kind of skills do we need post-COVID in our municipalities? If we have to change the delivery model of local government as a result of COVID-19, perhaps we have to ask ourselves if the training to date is necessarily geared towards that. Some municipalities are probably half the time offline. They can't deliver services. Some of them cannot even go beyond manual rendering of services. And how do you get municipalities to capacitate the human resources so that they can, they can deliver the kind of infrastructure, both physical, but also just in terms of services to citizens that are required post COVID-19, whether they be digital or just in terms of new digital services, but also new types of service innovations that you need to develop. The next thing, which is a critical point as well, that was raised by Prof. Pillay, is this issue of access to connectivity as a public good. And I think the reflection on this, we probably already have a few case studies that can be gleaned, we can glean lessons from, such as the experience of City of Tshwane, with the provision of a certain number, I think it was 500 megabytes or 1 gigabyte of data to every citizen. But again, it's one thing to learn lessons from the urban areas. We need to also look in the rural areas. Are we really using, for example, our development finance institutions effectively to provide this kind of public good? So, for example, you have the state-owned, what is that institution? Broadband Infraco. And one of their mandates was to go into rural areas and assist in ensuring, bridging the digital divide and securing connectivity. How engaged are municipalities with that type of institution as an example? And what guidance are you giving to those kinds of institutions? Whether it be from how you finance that infrastructure, or how is it accessed, given usually the sparse spatial planning in rural areas, those kinds of issues. How do we ensure that some of the national government level institutions actually get effective feedback from local government institutions on how to provide infrastructure that will be meaningful and useful to the citizens of these respective municipalities? And then finally, macroeconomic policy and its constraints. And again, this is always seen by its very nature to be a national government competency, if I can put it that way. And I think concerns have been raised that in the next 2 years, local government will probably be muscled out even further from the debates. But I do think, again, if you have a solid plan and engagement with business, for example, a solid plan and engagement in the form of a social compact with your own citizens as municipalities, somehow that strengthens you in your ability to make contributions to some of the macroeconomic discussions, because your inputs are rooted in very real and practical discussions that you and engagements that you are having with your various stakeholders. And through that engagement, you gain some kind of influence by participating in the various forums that government has set up for macroeconomic policy discussions. So in a way, I guess the message on that one is getting the house clean and in order at local government level before actually you can sufficiently influence what is happening in the macroeconomic discussions at a national level. So those are the 7 broad categories that I've picked up. And as I said, they are by no means exhaustive, but it was an attempt to put everything, to consolidate as much as possible what has been said in this very rich discussion that we've had this morning. So with that, colleagues, I'm going to call on our last speaker, which is Councillor Tunzihau, just to give us the closing remarks and the adjournment of the session. Just to say that there have been a lot of requests for the various presentations, and I see the organizers have indicated that they will avail the presentations. Kamantha, I assume that you've got, how you're going to do it, just through via email? You've got everyone's email address, or maybe just clarify how those presentations will be made available.
If everybody's okay, we can just send them to all via Dropbox if the presentations are really huge. And so then those who want to download it can, and we don't clog everyone's email box, with sizes. I think that's the best way to do it.
Okay, so
because I don't know, because I'm not sure who wants it and who doesn't. Then in this way, it just kind of gives everyone a choice.
Okay, so you're saying you'll put it in Dropbox and you'll send a link to everybody, and
so everyone who RSVP'd, yes, and then they can download which ones they want to.
All right, thank you. So Councillor Tunzihau, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Under new normal, there have been advantages and disadvantages. While some business opportunities were closed, some were opened. It is clear that the municipal revenue has been negatively affected, and as such, the municipality budgets are going to be affected drastically in terms of planning for the next financial year. I want to thank you very much, colleagues, for being able to put together these powerful, informative ideas. and taking time to share them with us in this platform. You have, in a way, opened our minds. We are leaving, you are leaving us with some food for thought. As part of planning in local government, some of the information is going to be influential on how we plan moving forward. Thank you very much for also making time to participate. Everyone who has been able to be part of this program, thank you very much. Your time and effort, including participation, is really appreciated. Thank you very much, Program Director.
Thank you, Councillor. Samantha, if there's nothing else, I think we can adjourn the session.
Yeah, you can end it, Nomfundo. Thank you so much for holding down the space. You were really amazing facilitating. We really appreciate it. And to our colleagues at SALGA and to everyone who stayed with us from 11 o'clock, we really do appreciate your time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, colleagues, and have a good weekend.
Good